Hello, I'm Sensei Alex Kakuyo. Thanks for joining me this evening for Dharma Sunday. The title of today's talk is The Legacy of Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh. Before we get into that, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way you'll be notified when I post talks in the future. If you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, that'd be great too. The Buddhist community received some rather sad news recently. It was announced by Plum Village Sangha that its guiding teacher and founder, Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, has passed into parinirvana. He was 95 years old. His health had been failing for quite a while, to the point that he asked to be moved back to his home temple in Vietnam to live out the rest of his days. And thankfully, we're told that he passed peacefully. So that is a bit of good news. But now that he's passed away, we're left to wonder a few things, to reflect on his legacy and the teachings he left behind. Now, I should start by saying I personally never met Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh. I never went to visit or practice at his monastery in the southwest of France, though I would like to someday. However, I have met many monastics and lay teachers from his tradition, the Plum Village Sangha. And I personally, as a homesteader, am a big believer that you can judge a tree by its fruit. In other words, if we have an apple tree that's producing apples that are rotten and sickly, well, that's probably not a very good apple tree. We may need to treat it somehow with medicine, or maybe we just need to cut it down, make it firewood. On the other hand, if we have an apple tree that's producing very sweet, very wonderful, tasty fruit, well, that's a very healthy tree. And we need to take some of its seeds and plant some more so we can have more trees like it. And while I never met Venerable myself, judging from my experiences with teachers from his tradition, both lay and monastic, and the deep levels of compassion and realization I've seen in them, I can only assume that Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh had roots that ran very deep. That his tree had branches that were very strong and wide, and that his level of realization was immense. I say all that to say I feel very fortunate and very lucky to have been born at a time when teachers like Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh are still available to the public. And the more I learn about him, the more impressed I am. He wrote or co-authored something like 30 books in the midst of offering teachings and running a monastic community. So he clearly had incredible endurance. On top of that, he was involved in the social justice movements here in the United States. Him and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. were both contemporaries, and they met here in the United States. So he was working to end suffering for sentient beings in a number of different ways. He was also the promulgator of something called engaged Buddhism, which from what I can tell has 3 tenets. First, engaged Buddhists work to maintain the Buddhist emphasis on inward spiritual growth. So this is the bodhisattva vow to save all sentient beings from suffering. Generally, this is understood as us engaging in the traditional Buddhist practices, bowing, chanting, meditating, etc., so that we can realize enlightenment, and then we move on to help others do the same. On top of that, however, engaged Buddhists also have a strong focus on reducing social and political suffering through reform. So an engaged Buddhist may chant and meditate one day, and then they may go out and work to pass legislation to protect a persecuted group. A good example of this is that Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh encouraged his followers to be vegan because he felt that we had to extend our compassion not only to human beings, but also to animals as well. Very powerful. In addition to that, Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh worked to lessen the divide between the lay community and the monastic community. So there are some Buddhist traditions where, whether it's said out loud or not, it's very clear that the monastic community, the priest community is up here, and the lay community is down here, right? And Venerable worked to equalize that by working equally hard to ordain and train both lay teachers and monastic teachers as well, which is somewhat revolutionary when he first started doing this. Now, on top of all of that, Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh had a real gift for taking canonical Buddhist understandings of the world and presenting them as useful, easy to understand teachings. An example of this can be found in the documentary Walk With Me. It came out in 2017, I believe. It famously had Benedict Cumberbatch as the narrator. And it's not a documentary about him per se so much as it is his monastic community in the southwest of France, and the Plum Village Sangha as a whole. And when I first watched the documentary several years ago, Venerable was doing a Q&A with a little girl after her dog had died. One of the very cool things about Plum Village Sangha is they encourage people, not for all the retreats, but for some of them, to bring their children along to practice as well. So again, lessening that divide between the monastic and lay community. The family is encouraged to be involved in Buddhist training. And the little girl's on stage with him and they're talking, and she asks a question. She says her dog has died and she doesn't know how to stop being sad. And I heard that question and I cringed a little bit because I didn't know what he was going to say. And if you've been on any of the Buddhist Facebook groups, you know that usually when the question of death comes up, it's something about Buddhists don't worry about the afterlife, or there's no one here to die, things of that nature. And I didn't know how he was going to respond. But Venerable looked at her and he said, the dog is in the trees. He's in the grass. He's in the sunshine. Every time you walk on the grass, every time the sun shines on your face, just remember that your dog is still with you. And the little girl smiles and Venerable smiled, and it was a very wonderful moment. The music is rising in the background. And that's a very sweet, very nice thing to say, but we have to wonder, is that the correct Buddhist teaching, or was he just fudging things a little bit? Well, to understand that, we need to first understand the Trikaya teaching of Buddhism, which states that the Buddha, the universal Buddha, exists in three bodies. We have the Dharmakaya, also known as the storehouse consciousness, which is the wisdom body of Buddha. That's that which is beyond name and form, suchness. Then we have the Sambhogakaya, which is the joy body of Buddha. And this is the celestial beings, Amida, the Buddha of infinite light, Kanaan, the Bodhisattva of compassion, etc. And finally, we have the Nirmanakaya, which is the physical or the transformation body of Buddha. And that's us. That's the grass, that's the dog, that's the little girl, that's Venerable. Everything in our physical world is Nirmanakaya. And in Buddhism, we are taught that all things grow out of the Dharmakaya. This is one of the reasons we say all living beings are Buddha, because we come from the wisdom body of Buddha. So we are all Buddhas in the same way that all waves that come from the ocean are water. Now, if we look at the teachings of Vasubandhu, who was a Yogacara Buddhist, in his 30 verses, we know that things rise up out of the Dharmakaya and they go back to the Dharmakaya based on karma. So karmic seeds are planted in the storehouse consciousness. When conditions and timing are ripe, those seeds ripen, and I'm formed, you're formed, the dog forms, etc. And then when conditions and timing are ripened again, those things disappear. So just like wind on the surface of the ocean create waves, karma on the surface of the Dharmakaya creates living beings. And our lives, the lives of all things in creation, are simply things coming up out of the Dharmakaya and returning to the Dharmakaya. Coming out of the Buddha body and returning to the Buddha body. So based on the Trikaya teaching and the teaching of Vasubandhu, we know that our universe is simply one of continuous, never-ending change. The leaf is the branch, is the tree, is the roots, is the soil. It's all the same. It's just our mind that chops it up into pieces and says they're separate. So what does this have to do with a dead dog? Well, using that same understanding I just described, the dog was born due to karmic seeds. It had a great life with the little girl, series of transformations. One of those transformations was birth, another was aging, another was sickness, another was death. And when it died, it simply transformed and went back into the Dharmakaya, just like a wave returning to the ocean. Waves come and go, but the ocean is always there. We come and go, but the Buddha body is always there. So what Venerable was explaining was that the dog had simply spread out. He'd become the worms and the soil and the grass that grew over his grave and the sun that shined down on the little girl. The dog's physical body was gone, yes, but his Buddha body was still there, just in a different shape. And because the girl also comes from that same Buddha body, she and the dog are never separated. So what Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh was doing in that moment is taking hundreds of years of Buddhist teachings, funneling them down, simplifying them so that they could be explained in 2 minutes to a little girl in a way that was both useful and kind and doctrinally correct. That's what genius looks like. Anyone can quote scripture. And if he had just rattled off something from Vasubandhu's 30 verses, he would have been correct teaching. Anyone can make up euphemisms that don't really mean much of anything. We see them all over Instagram. And if he had done that, well, we all would have just smiled and, that was a nice thing to say. But to take hundreds of years of teachings, draw on them on the spot, present them in a way that both makes the little girl feel better and helps her understand Buddhism better, that's his legacy, in my mind. That's his teaching. That Buddhism isn't something we just find in books. It's not just something we do here in the meditation hall. That if we approach the Dharma correctly, it is useful for everyday problems. A dog that has passed away, a job that's not going the way we want to, snow falling when we just shoveled the driveway. When I think of the legacy of Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, what I think about is the way he made Dharma available to normal, ordinary people without watering it down. He showed us that the teachings of Buddha are still relevant. And while he never made this claim, I do believe personally that Venerable was a reincarnation of the Buddha. one of many. And I feel so lucky, again, that I'm alive in a time where I can benefit from those teachings, that we all can. Venerable was an artist. He was a friend, and he took the teachings and he left us with a wide variety of beautiful paintings to look at, to draw from. And there's really not much more to say, but thank you. Amitabha. So that's the talk for today. I hope it was helpful. I'll just end with a few announcements. So this was Dharma Sunday. We do it every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, broadcast right here at this channel. If you enjoyed tonight's talk, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way you'll be notified when I post talks in the future. If you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, that'd be very helpful both to me and the channel. On Wednesdays, we do something called meditation and suture study, which is a bit more involved. That's a 15-minute guided meditation, a reading from Buddhist scripture, again, followed by a Dharma talk. And that's at Wednesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern, again, broadcast here at this channel. So I hope to see you there. Until next time, Amitabha.